Good morning, good morning to you, you. Good morning, good morning to you, you. Good morning, good morning. Won't you share with a friend or two? Good morning. Good morning to you, you. Testing out my sound. Good morning, good morning, good morning to you. Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. And welcome, welcome, welcome to Daring Dialogues. This is a special series that I'm going to be lecturing on every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to be looking at Hoodoo, origins and understanding. I want to welcome you into this space, and I want to first of all say thank you to those of you who are following, viewing, and watching this page, our videos, our reels, reading the articles that we put up on a regular basis. I want to say thank you for your following. Please take a moment to share this video out, as this is a very intriguing topic. It's intriguing, it's important to a lot of people, especially within our community. There has been lots of conversation lately happening around this topic of hoodoo. It is October, so it's also Hoodoo Heritage Month. So we wanted to make sure that we took a moment to dive into this topic. I will give a disclaimer by saying that by no means am I a scholar on the subject. I am, however, a researcher, I am an educator, and I have experienced some of the practices that we're going to talk about. If you are a part of the African American community, if you are a part of the Black diaspora or the African diaspora, if you are part of the Caribbean diaspora, you too have probably either heard of hoodoo, or you may have experienced hoodoo, or you may be involved in the practices yourself. And so I'm giving a moment for people to share this video out. I am also going to my platforms right now, my other platforms, and sharing this video out. And before we begin, I also want to say that I am going to be treating this subject with as much respect and honor as it deserves. So I am by no means going to be looking at this from the lens of trying to disparage anybody for their spirituality or their spiritual practice, but we are simply going to be looking at hoodoo to understand and to know its origins. Again, this is part one of the series. So before we begin, this is part one of the series. We are not going to, in no means, in my studying, I'm realizing there is no way that I could cover all of what I have learned in 1 hour. So we are going to have this as a series. We will be here every Tuesday. Good morning, Brittany, and good morning, Shantae. Good things come in those two names, by the way. So I am going to be doing two things here. There is a StreamYard link down in the comments. If you want to, once we get done with part one today, if you want to come in and we have some time and you want to come into the platform to talk, you'll have the option to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and present first. All right. So check out that link. The StreamYard link is in the comment section for those who might want to come on and talk directly, because I will not be using the Facebook platform to do that on today. All right, let's get started. Origins and understandings. Oftentimes, hoodoo gets interpolated as voodoo. What is voodoo? Let's take a look. Voodoo is a syncretic religious system that is derived from African gods and ancestor veneration and is practiced chiefly in Haiti. When combined with hoodoo, it may be called Gullah voodoo or Low Country voodoo, Louisiana voodoo, or New Orleans voodoo. And this is also practiced in states like Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, not listed here, North Carolina, South Carolina. Okay? And again, we're talking about this from a research perspective. We're not here to tell you what to believe or who to believe or how to believe. We are simply covering what it is. All right? Again, the topic is hoodoo, origins, and understanding. So that's first off. What is voodoo? Now let's look at what is hoodoo. Hoodoo is a spiritual practice found in the parts of the Caribbean and the southern U.S., North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. Sounds like a rap, doesn't it? These origins can be also found in Haiti and Central Africa. Okay? Hoodoo can also mean something that has brought bad energy, or some people say bad luck, or some people say trouble. You might hear the phrase, they've been hoodooed. Okay? Let's keep going. So, in essence, hoodoo is a set of spiritual practices, traditions, and beliefs that were created by enslaved African Americans in the southern United States from various traditional African spiritualities, Christianity, and elements of indigenous botanical knowledge brought from Africa and adjusted for the indigenous botanical world of the United States. Oftentimes, I've heard people say that hoodoo is set apart from Christianity, but we're going to look at some research today that actually refutes that notion. Okay. A lot of people want to distance themselves, especially Christians. I know. A lot of Christians want to distance themselves from hoodoo, but we're going to look at some history and see how much of a distancing there actually is. Okay. Practitioners of hoodoo are called root workers. In today's whitewash terms, we might call them herbalists, okay, but they're root workers, conjure doctors, conjure man or conjure woman, root doctors, also known today in our society as naturopathic doctors, hoodoo doctors, and swampers. Regional synonyms for hoodoo include conjure or root work. It is as a syncretic spiritual system. It also incorporates Islam brought over by enslaved West African Muslims and spiritualism. Scholars define hoodoo as a folk religion. Folk religions are syncretic traditions between two or more cultural practices. In this case, African indigenous spirituality and the Abrahamic religions. So, what does that mean? That means that more than likely hoodoo is not going to look the same based on who is practicing. Okay? Because their underlying spiritual systems might be different from another hoodoo practitioner. So let's look a little bit more at origins. Many hoodoo traditions draw from the beliefs of the Kongo people or the Kongo people of Central Africa. These were and are a Bantu speaking people that speak Kikongo. Over the first century of the transatlantic slave trade, an estimated 52% of all kidnapped Africans, this is an estimation of over 900,000 people that survived the Middle Passage, came from Central African countries that existed within modern day Cameroon, Congo, Angola, Central African Republic, and Gabon. By the end of the colonial period, enslaved Africans were taken from Angola about 40%, Senegambia, they estimate around 19%, the Windward Coast around 16%, and the Gold Coast around 13%, as well as the Bight of Benin and the Bight of Biafra in smaller percentages. Following the Great Migration of African Americans, Hoodoo spread throughout the United States. Okay? So Hoodoo is not just something that just popped out of the blue. Okay? It has an origin story. And the incredible and amazing thing about this is if you are an African American and you have family members or you have elders in your family that have some hoodoo practices, you're actually have a through line all the way back to the Congo. I want you to just think about that for a moment. So let's talk about these Kongo people. Okay. Good morning and grand rising. Kongo people. The Kongo people were among the earliest indigenous Africans to welcome the Portuguese traders in 1483 CE. They began converting to Catholicism in the late 15th century of their own accord. So this is pre-colonial. This is I'm going to force you into enslavement through conversion to Christianity. Okay? So historically, everyone was not forced. And we need to stop saying that everyone was forced into Christianity because it's not true. Okay? They were among the first to protest slave capture, however, in letters to the King of Portugal in the 1510s and the 1520s. They eventually succumbed to the demands for enslaved persons from the Portuguese through the 16th century. The Kongo people were a part of major slave raiding, captures, and export trade of African enslaved to the European colonial interests in the 17th and 18th centuries. The slave raids, colonial wars, and 19th century scramble for Africa began to split the Kongo people into Portuguese, Belgian, and French parts. In the early 20th century, they became one of the most active ethnic groups in the efforts to decolonize Africa, helping to liberate 3 nations to self-governance. Those are your people, African Americans. All right, let's keep going because I got quite a bit to cover, I think. The first documentation of the word hoodoo in the English language appeared around 1870. And although it was not clear exactly where it came from, they knew that it referred to divinity. They knew that it referred to divinity. Let me say it one more time for the people in the back. They knew that it referred to divinity, not the devil, divinity. A possible etymological origin of the word hoodoo comes from the word hoodoo, Hudu, meaning spirit work, which comes from the U language spoken in the West African countries of Ghana, Togo, and Benin. Hoodoo is also one of the dialects of the U language of the U people in West Africa. According to Paschal Beverly Randolph, who was a known practitioner during his day, the word hoodoo is an African dialect. Let's talk more about the etymology of the word. The origin of the word hoodoo, in other words, associated with the practice, could be traced to the Windward Coast and Senegambia. For example, in West Africa, the word grease, a conjure bag, is a Mande word or a Mande word. The words wanga and moyo or mojo bag came from the Kongo language. Hoodoo is seen as an African dialect with practices similar to the mysteries of Obia or Obia in the Caribbean. In the Bahamas, hoodoo is referred to as Obia. According to author Zora Neale Hurston, who did extensive research on voodoo and hoodoo in the Caribbean and particularly in Bahamas, I'm actually waiting on her book to get here. Roots is the Southern Negroes' term for folk doctoring by herbs and prescriptions, and by extension, and because all hoodoo doctors cure by roots or cure by herbs, it may be used as a synonym for hoodoo. I hope you're following me and I'm not losing anybody at this point. Recent scholarship publications have begun to spell the word with a capital letter. The word has different meanings depending on how it is spelled. Some authors spell hoodoo with a capital letter to make a distinction from the commercialized hoodoo that has taken over the United States, because we know that if it can be monetized, it will be colonized. So they do now make a distinction between commercial hoodoo and hoodoo, the closed practice, because for many people, hoodoo is considered a closed practice. And we'll get into that in another segment, but not today. All right. According to author Ode Wirafo Kwesi Rodnehem Pata Akan, the etymological origin of the word hoodoo comes from the Akan language of Ghana and the Ivory Coast. He points out the Akan word Odu or Indu is defined as medicine from roots, trees, and plant life. The same term also means to become heavy, i.e., with the spirit, through spiritual possession or spiritual communication. Moreover, the same term means to feel a presentiment or foreboding. There are ritual practitioners in the Akan culture whose titles include the term Odu, namely Oduyefo, Odusinfo, Odumafo. These titles are defined as root worker, root doctor, diviner, and poisoner, respectively. All right. So what you're finding is, or what you're going to find is, it comes out of the Congo. And any of you who have done your ancestry DNA test and you have things on your test like Benin, Togo, Congo, okay? These are your people. These are your people. So don't run away. Don't run away from your people and your origin story. All right? This is going to stay up for future listening and learning. This is part 1. Let us keep going. Hoodoo incorporations. All right? According to Dr. Yvonne Chareau, Hoodoo is an African American based tradition that makes use of natural and supernatural elements in order to create and affect change in the human experience. Hoodoo was created by African Americans who were among over 12 million enslaved Africans from various Central and West African ethnic groups that were transported here. We know we were transported, some were transported, some were already here. Some were transported, some were already here. We're not getting into an argument about that today. The transatlantic slave trade to the United States occurred between 1619 and 1808, and the illegal slave trade that continued after that occurred between 1808 and 1860. So between 1619 and 1860, approximately 500,000 enslaved Africans were transported to the United States alone. From Central Africa, Hoodoo has Kongo influence from the Kongo religion, incorporating the Kongo cosmogram, which we'll actually hopefully get into in part 2, what that actually is and what it looks like, but you're free to look it up yourself. Simbi water, Nkisi and Minkisi practices. The West African influence is Vodun from the Fan and U people in Benin and Togo, following some elements from the Yoruba religion. So again, depending on where you came out of Africa from, Hoodoo is not going to have the same style elements or even presentation depending on what part of Africa your people might have come from. Okay? So some Hoodoo may have a Islamic spiritual foundation or base to it. Some Hoodoo may have a Protestant Christian base to it. Some Hoodoo may have a Catholic influence to it. Hope everybody is following that conversation, following me on that. Today, I'm going to get a chance to show you what an Nkisi looks like. And most of you are probably going to figure out how the Nkisi has evolved in the United States. But we're going to look at it from the Congo. Again, with Hoodoo incorporations, after their contact with European slave traders and missionaries, some Africans converted to Christianity willingly. Let me say that. While other enslaved Africans were forced to become Christian, which resulted in a synchronization of African spiritual practices and beliefs with the Christian faith. Not apart from the Christian faith, with the Christian faith. Just blink twice if you're okay. Enslaved and free Africans learned regional indigenous botanical knowledge after they arrived to the United States. Because why are they learning regional indigenous botanical knowledge? Because they're still trying to carry their practice over. However, you're going to have different fauna and flora here in the United States, so they have to adjust. Hoodoo will not look the same in every region due to the regional botanical differences and whatever religious practice that may undergird the person practicing. Let me check my comment section. All right. We got it? We got it. Okay. Let me continue. Thank you all for listening. Hoodoo incorporations hidden. This is the fun part for me. I love this part. The extent to which Hoodoo could be practiced varied by region and by the temperament of the enslavers, slaveholders, overseers. For example, the Gullah people of the coastal Southeast experienced an isolation and relative freedom that allowed retention of various traditional West African cultural practices. We've been teaching on the Gullah Geechee people, but this ties into it because many times they had an immunity to some of the things that were happening disease-wise in the area. Oftentimes, the overseers and the plantation owners stayed away, which allowed them to be more isolated, which allowed them to not have eyes on them when they were doing their practices. So they have a greater retention of their traditional cultural practices than other parts of the United States. Okay. Gullah people and enslaved African Americans in the Mississippi Delta, where the concentration of enslaved people was dense. Hoodoo was practiced under a large cover of secrecy there. The reason for secrecy among enslaved and free African Americans was that slave codes prohibited large gatherings of enslaved and free Black people. So you couldn't gather in large groups. Hence, they had to take their practices underground. That was one of the reasons of the secrecy. Slaveholders experienced how slave religion ignited slave revolts among enslaved and free Black people, and some leaders of slave insurrections were Black ministers and conjure doctors. Now you might be getting a little bit of an idea of why it might be important to demonize this practice. Many hoodoo practices were hidden in Black churches during and after slavery by African Americans to protect themselves. And we're going to go deeper into that in part 2 about why they had to protect themselves. Scholars have called the practice of hoodoo in Black churches the invisible institution because enslaved Black people concealed their culture and practices from whites within the Christian religion. And I dare say a lot of people are still concealing their practices because if it can be monetized, it will be colonized. One of the books I recommend that you get if you want to look more. Let me see if I can change my screen up for a moment. Let's see. Let me do that. If you want to get more information specifically about the Mid-South root workers, this is Memphis, Alabama, Tennessee, Louisiana. This book here gives a really, really thorough accounting. We're going to talk about some of that information in here, but that is the resource there for you. All right. Let us continue. The Black Code, or Code Noir, was implemented in 1724. This was just one of the codes that was implemented. There was many more, but this is the one out of French colonial Louisiana. It regulated the lives of enslaved and free people and prohibited and made it illegal for enslaved Africans to practice their traditional religions. Article 3 in the Code Noir states, "We forbid any public exercise of any religion other than Catholic." So much for freedom of religion, right? Not quite yet at 1776. This is when they're forbidding things. They're not forbidding it for themselves. They're forbidding it for the enslaved Africans. We forbid any public exercise of any religion other than Catholic. The Code Noir and other slave laws resulted in enslaved and free African Americans conducting their spiritual practices in secluded areas, such as woods, also known as hush harbors, churches, and other places. The enslaved created methods to decrease their noise when they practiced their spirituality. How do we get all of these different variations? In a slave narrative from Arkansas, slaves prayed under pots to decrease their noise to prevent nearby whites from hearing them have church. Oh my goodness. Where do the pots come from? The tambourines, the washboards. What were they doing all of that for? A former enslaved person in Arkansas named John Hunter said the enslaved went to a secret house only they knew, and they turned the iron pots face up, and their slaveholder could not hear them. Enslaved also placed sticks under wash pots about a foot from the ground to decrease their noise as the sound they made during their rituals went into the pots. I feel a shout right now. Oh, the wonderful wisdom ways that our ancestors had. During the slave trade, the majority of Central Africans imported to New Orleans, Louisiana, were the Bakongo people. This particular image here, let me see if I can blow it up a little bit more so you can see that. Yeah. Image was painted in 1886, and it shows African Americans in New Orleans performing dances from Africa in Kongo Square. So if you're familiar with Kongo Square, know that Kongo Square is a sacred space for Black America. Mm-hmm. It was where the African Americans practiced. Kongo Square. All right, let's continue. Enslaved Africans in America held on to their African culture. Scholars assert Christianity did not have much of an influence on some of the enslaved Africans as they continued to practice their traditional spiritual practices. And hoodoo was a form of resistance against slavery, whereby enslaved Africans hid their traditions using the Christian religion against their slave holders. I'm sorry, hoodoo was a form of what? Somebody type it into the chat. Hoodoo was a form of what? I'm waiting for somebody to type it. Hoodoo was a form of what against slavery? Because you were told that there was no resistance, right? You were led to believe that they just went along with whatever Massa had to say, right? I mean, that's the story that's being told in today's history books. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This branch of Christianity among the enslaved was concealed from slaveholders in invisible churches. Invisible churches were secret churches where enslaved African Americans combined hoodoo with Christianity. Enslaved and free Black ministers preached resistance to slavery and the power of God through praise and worship and hoodoo rituals, and they preached that it would free the slaves from bondage. Now, I want to ask a question. Did they lie? Oh my gosh. Did they lie? I don't think they lied. Mm-hmm. Because you, beloveds, are, as the Apostle Paul would say, we are the epistles of their faith. We are the evidence of their belief. We are the evidence of their belief. William Edward Burgart Du Bois, also known as W.E.B. Du Bois, studied African American churches in the early 20th century. Du Bois asserts the early years of the Black church during enslavement on plantations was influenced by these practices. Black church records in the late 19th century into the early 20th century in the South recorded a number of church members that practiced conjure and combined Christian and African spiritual concepts to either harm or heal members in their community. Because, as with any spiritual practice, one can use it and one can misuse it. This image here is a picture of Kongo Square. This is now an open space within Louis Armstrong Park, which is located in the Treem neighborhood of New Orleans. If you know about the Treem, I think there's some series on the Treem. There's some documentaries on the Treem. This is that sacred space. It's located in the French Quarter. It's also famous for its influence on jazz. A little bit of music history there. So, what do we know? Just in those few nuggets on the origin and on just origin and etymology, what do we know for sure? We know that at the heart of hoodoo is an unbroken connection back to Africa through spiritual practice thought to have been lost to the slave trade. I don't want you to talk about hoodoo. I don't want you to get back to hoodoo. I don't want you to dig into it. I don't want you to know about its practices, because you just might realize you have an unbroken connection that your ancestors kept from the colonizer. I don't want you to understand that you have an unbroken connection that you have not even tapped into because you're too busy whitewashing your own beliefs. Or somebody has convinced you to whitewash your own beliefs. I'm preaching better than y'all typing today, but I'm going to keep going. So let's look at some of these terms that people keep using and demonizing. Because I'm an educator, I'm a teacher. This is what I do. I live for this. Okay. Veneration. I have heard this word used so many times and misused. Veneration does not mean worship. When people say that ancestor veneration is a part of their spiritual practice, veneration simply means to have great respect or reverence for. So if you don't want to reverence and respect your own ancestors, that is on you. I'm not here to tell you what to do or how to do it. I'm just here to tell you what it is. All right? Veneration is to have great respect or reverence for something. Let me tell you who reverences their ancestors: the United States of America. Well, how do they reverence their ancestors? I'm glad you asked. You ever heard of the 4th of July? The 4th of July is a veneration celebration. It's a veneration celebration. It is to reverence the quote unquote founding fathers of the United States of America. Nobody turns around and says, "Oh my God, the nation is practicing ancestor worship. They must die." Nobody does that. They get their hot dogs out. They put on their red, white, and blue with their stars. They have fireworks and they venerate. And nobody says anything about it. So stop the cap. Stop the cap, okay? Veneration. They have great respect and reverence. Let's look at another word. Invocation. You will often hear this word at graduation ceremonies. You might hear it in the Black church, especially at the beginning of a service. They might say, "We're going to call for the invocation," or "We're going to invoke the presence of God." What does invocation mean? It's the act of invoking something or someone for assistance or as an authority. It is the summoning, can be the summoning of a deity or the summoning of the supernatural. So are we summoning the supernatural into graduation ceremonies then, and we having invocations? Huh? Talk to me. All right. So that's what invocation is. Invocation. Here's another word. Conjure. Conjure. What does it mean? When someone says they are a conjurer, what do they mean? To call upon a spirit or ghost. Now, if you are a Christian and you call upon the Holy Spirit, you conjure. By definition, to call upon a spirit or ghost to appear by means of a magical ritual. It can be by means of what is called a magical ritual. For example, they hope to conjure up the spirit of their dead friend. Okay? So some people are calling up spirits. Some people are calling up ghosts. Again, I'm not here to tell you or define what you're calling up, but I'm here to tell you what conjure is. To make something appear unexpectedly or seemingly from nowhere, as if by magic, to implore someone to do something. So when we use these terms, or when somebody uses a term, it's good for you to go and say, what exactly do you mean by that? When you say you're a conjurer, what exactly do you mean? Are you conjuring up spirits? Or are you conjuring up the Holy Spirit? Are you invoking the presence of the Holy Spirit? Just go down your list of Christian songs and go listen to some of them that invoke the presence of God or invoke the presence of the Holy Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. All right, let me go on because I know somebody about to get mad. We're nearing the end of part one. This is where we're going to stop today. This, as we looked at earlier, is called an Nkisi. This is the Nkisi power figure. We're going to click on the video. I'm going to click on the video. We're going to take a few minutes to watch this together. And then I'm going to come back down and I'm going to share with you about it. So I'm going to go off screen. You will not hear me for the next few minutes. And you're going to learn a little bit about the Nkisi power figure and how does this power figure make its way over here to the United States.
We're at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and we're looking at a Kongo Nkisi figure from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
So the Congo is in Central Africa. It was a large kingdom that was founded in the 14th century and over the centuries eventually colonized by Belgium. When the Portuguese, who arrived in Africa in the late 15th century, saw these figures, Nkisi, and also brought missionaries to Christianize the people of the Congo, they asked that these figures be burned.
The term Nkisi refers to a spirit, but more specifically medicine. And when I say medicine, I don't mean an aspirin. I mean the herbs and supplements that a healer would use to help someone on a physical, but also on a spiritual, mental, and emotional level. The Nganga is the ritual specialist among the Congo in this period of time, around the 19th century, who would use Nkisi figures to help his clients.
So the Nganga would ask a sculptor to carve this, and then the Nganga would use it over the course of a considerable amount of time. And over that time, this figure would accrue everything that we see on it. And all of this material is covering its abdomen, where likely, although we can't see it, is a case for holding that spiritual medicine.
That spiritual center, the moyo, the belly, is where you place the medicine or the materials. And it could be stone, it could be herbs, it could be pastes and clays. The Nganga would be mixing this formula together, placing it in the cavity in the belly, and then covering up so that it's completely sealed.
So the Nganga would use this figure in several different ways. He could use it to heal a client who came to him, but he could also use it to record agreements and contracts, and also could activate it to go after evildoers.
As a witness, the Nkisi really is there to honor contracts and agreements and oaths that are taken. And the Nganga might take a strip of cloth and literally tie and bind that agreement together.
So each one of those knots that we're seeing is likely that.
And in order for the Nkisi to do your bidding, that is to go after someone who broke an oath or did you wrong, you might use dog's teeth or elements of birds.
And we see a sharp object that looks like it belonged to an animal, a bird or a dog, that could do harm.
In order to activate this Nkisi, because really it's just a piece of wood until it's activated with a spirit, the Nganga would hammer nails into its skin, thereby calling attention to the Nkisi to come and do its bidding.
So there are so many nails. It feels like this was used over decades.
It constantly looks different as the nganga works. And while we see it here encrusted and crumbling and full of lots of materials, what it's probably missing is the medicine that was in its abdomen originally, because it said that the medicine pouch is so central and so potent, you would not sell this piece or let it fall into the hands of anyone but the nganga with that present.
So likely it originally had legs, was able to stand, had a base. Those are not here. It's impossible to know exactly what those looked like. But the figure really is encrusted on all of its sides. But there's another example here at the Met where we can see more clearly the opening in the abdomen.
And we notice that that abdomen is hollow. So whatever was inside of it has been taken out, rendering it impotent.
We also see amulets. One of them is beaded. Another looks almost like a nut that's got some carving on the outside.
Seed pods, pieces of animal, carved figures. And the carved figures actually have something inside of their bellies.
And we seem to have two interlocking crocodiles.
We also have a bell on the side, which is similar to the nails in that it can be rung to bring the Nkisi spirit into this figure. And the Nkisi would have been housed in the Nganga's home, in his shrine.
If I was a client, I would bring money or something to trade to the nganga who would do this work for me, either mark a contract or an agreement of some kind or right some sort of wrong for me.
And so the nganga also has to remember what each one of these nails and knots were for. The Nkisi then becomes a wonderful historic social document of a group of people who sought out help from their ritual specialist.
All right. That is the end of part 1 today, Hoodoo Origins and Understandings. As you could see with the Nkisi power figure, there are a lot of similarities. Most people find that there are similarities between the Nkisi power figure and what has been commercialized into the quote unquote voodoo doll. They hold very similar traits, but that is the origin story. All right. If you would like to come on, we do have some time. If you would like to come on, we've got about 10 minutes here. If you would like to come back stage to conversate on the topic, let me see. Show. I believe the StreamYard link is in the chat, but let me see if I can put it in here again. Yes, I can. All right, down at the bottom, you should see the link. And yes, we have always been very innovative. So if anybody wants to come backstage to share today, I think I'm putting it in the right place. We'll see if anybody pops up backstage. Just checking my comments here. Thank you all for tuning in. All right. Anybody want to come backstage? Do I have any takers? In the comment section, Write down what you noticed about the Nkisi figure. What did you notice about the Nkisi figure? They were referring to what we saw in the research as the moyo, that space that's empty within the center. What do you think went in that space? Remember, the museum curator said that they were not activated in Kisi. What do you think went in that space? I'm looking in the comments. And this again is a part of what they were asked to give up. But clearly, they did not give up these practices, right? Anybody want to take a guess at what went into that space, into the moyo? I'm shrinking back down here. Let's go back to that slide. I think it was 19. There it is. So if you look at the power figure, this space right underneath this cross here, that space would have held what's called the mojo pouch or the mojo bag, which is often seen in the hoodoo practice. For museum purposes, whoever sold this to the museum or however the museum acquired it, like they said, that person took that pouch out to deactivate the form because that pouch would have represented that person's soul or that person's spirit or that person's attachment to the object. All right. We're going to stop here for today. I hope that you have enjoyed learning about the origins and understandings of hoodoo. This is only part 1. We'll be back with part 2 on next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, I want to thank you for your time and attention. This has been a special series. Nails is interesting. How far back would that go? In terms of the figure, how old is that figure? Those figures were from the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that figure comes directly from the Kongo. But we know that those practices have been going on longer than that. All right, good question. All right, this is our wrap up for today. I hope you will join me next Tuesday, same place, same time. We'll be talking part 2, and we're going to dive a little bit more into why is it that they were hiding these practices. So beyond, we know that these practices were things that they believed were going to help to free them. These practices are what they used to help to free themselves. So a lot of times people say it was Haiti, but it wasn't just Haiti that was using these practices or had these beliefs that what was happening to them was not right. And we're going to talk about that in part 2. Thank you all for your time and attention. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. And I hope we have shed some light today on hoodoo for you. Take care, be well, and most importantly, be light.